Okay, there's probably 2 feet of snow out here right now. Maybe even more. And I don't know how I'm gonna be getting out of this cul-de-sac. All right, let's see if I can avoid bottoming out and getting to class. Okay, I know there's a lot of snow, it's still surprising me, but let's forget about that for now. What I want to talk about is the difference between how I studied in undergrad compared to how I'm studying now in medical school. In my last video, I mentioned how my transition from high school to undergrad wasn't the most seamless. And one reason for that may have been how I was actually studying. It sucks when you have to do this every single time you get into your car. All right, let's get out of here. This is the 3rd time that I've cleaned my car off today, and we are still supposed to get about another 20 centimeters overnight. And I know I said, okay, that's enough about the snow, but this is the most snow that I've ever seen in my life. While I was walking out of class, the snowbank is about almost up to my waist. So it's pretty crazy. In terms of school, one thing I wish I had realized a little bit quicker was that my study methods weren't working for me in my first 2 years. This would have made my life so much easier, but luckily I did have 3rd and 4th year to practice a new technique and hammer it down. That way I was able to get really used to it by the time I started medical school. So that's what I'll be doing, is showing you what I do now in comparison to the passive studying that I was doing prior to this. Okay, let's get shoveling. This is for context, just to show you how much it's been snowing here. I finished the entire driveway, and these stairs have not been shoveled at all. So I'm gonna take a jump inside the snow just to show you how deep it actually is before I get started in shoveling. All right, now I have to get rid of it. That was my exercise for this evening. And while I'm catching my breath, I thought I'd explain a little bit about how I study right now in medical school. While I'm in lecture, I always annotate the lecture slides. This is my first exposure to the material, and while the prof is speaking, I write down important things on the PDFs that we get beforehand. So as you all know, I shoveled the entire driveway yesterday, and by this time right now, which is afternoon, our street has been plowed, and they were nice enough to plow some of the driveway as well. But this is the front door. Lots of snow once again. I was gonna go grab a quick haircut and then finish the rest of this, but I came over to get into my car and I actually can't get into my car. So I'm gonna do a quick shovel. All right, hopefully this is the last time I'm doing that for a while. Time to go get a haircut. As you can tell, no haircut for me. No haircut for anybody today. I'm lucky I was able to get out and get back to my place without getting stuck. There was cars stuck everywhere. The parking lots were a mess. I actually shouldn't have even gone out, and I know they actually said don't go out today unless it's an emergency. But this hair is an emergency. I'm flying out of town tomorrow, so I'm hoping that some things will be cleared tomorrow, and I'm gonna have to do a lot of last minute stuff before I head out of town. Now, let's finally get into how I'm studying in med school. This is my general setup when I actually start studying. After I've annotated the lecture slides, what I do is I make another set of notes. So as I mentioned before, sitting in lecture, writing down notes there, that's my first exposure to the material. Then my second exposure to the material is at this point right here. So what I do is I have my lecture slides on one side of my screen, and then I usually have another source on the other side of the screen. But normally I like to use Toronto Notes because of how concise it is and how easy it is to understand. It's also laid out really nicely, which makes it a lot easier for me. At this point, I write down things that I think are important. And when I'm studying during exam period, I'm only referring to what I wrote down. So in this case, I'm doing a lecture on PCOS. And for example, this lecture, it starts off with a historical context. So I have a date 1935, and for the purpose of my notes, I'm not going to write this down because I don't think this is crucial for my understanding of what PCOS is. And this is the exact reason why I don't like to use lecture slides when I'm studying for the exam. I don't want to have to sift through information like that in order to figure out what I need to remember. I only want to memorize and study things that are really important. The next slide is how do we make the diagnosis? And this is something that's very important. Patients need 2 out of 3 of the following. So there's a list presented. The reason why I use another source like Toronto Notes is so I can compare the information from the lecture and in a clinical notebook. Under PCOS here, again, there is a diagnostic criteria. 2 of the 3 are required, and it has the exact same list. That way I know this is something that's very important, and I write this down in my notes. If there's something that's missed in my lecture slides that I think is really important, for example, this goes into investigations that will confirm PCOS. And if this information is not in the lecture slides, I do like to include it in my notes because it gives me a better clinical picture of what I'm dealing with. This is something that will be important when I'm actually practicing. So even though it's not something that I need to know for the exam, it's something that I would like to know. I go through the entire lecture like this, alongside another source, and I write down what I think is really important. And how I categorize it in my notes is I will have one lecture, I have headings, and then I have subheadings, and then I have all the information that I need. And all of this is color-coded based on what I'm used to. That way when I'm looking at this, I know right away what I'm looking at. I know what the main heading is, I know the pertinent information, and then I also use another color for small notes just to remind me or to trigger my memory on something. For this week, which is infertility, I've condensed all of my notes into 1 page and a little bit. So this lecture on PCOS, I was able to condense into I would say about 1 column. This has been a huge help for me, and I wish that there was somebody that could have showed me another way of taking notes during undergrad. My previous study method of just basically sitting, scrolling through lecture slides over and over again, hoping that something would stick, obviously was not the best idea. One other thing that I forgot to mention is that when I'm annotating notes in lecture, I'm not actually paying attention to the material at all. I'm really just writing down what I hear, and I don't really understand the lecture material itself. As the first exposure though, that's fine. When I'm writing down these notes from the lecture slides, it takes me a long time to do, maybe even a little too long. But the reason why it takes me so long is that I really understand everything that I'm writing down. When it comes to studying, I would say 80% of my studying is actually finished just by writing the notes. That's how much I try to understand what I'm writing down. If I don't understand the concept, then I don't write it down in my notes. So those two things go hand in hand in terms of my workflow. Writing the notes out on a whiteboard to help me solidify my knowledge, that's about the last 20% of my workflow. Apart from lecture material, I study a little bit different when it comes to anatomy and histology. For those courses, I make flashcards on Anki, or Anki. I still don't know how to say it. Again, this is very different from what I did in undergrad. And depending on what stage you are right now watching this, you can also try this. This obviously doesn't work for everybody. And just like my MMI preparation, if this works for me, it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. But if you're struggling right now, try to switch it up. You need to give something else a try. I hope you found this video at least a little bit informative. If not, then at least you got to see what this winter storm was like in Prince George this year. Other than that, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like this channel so far, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed. I never know how to end these videos off, but okay, that's it.